Good morning, everybody, or almost good afternoon. So my name is Todd Boren. I'm with MacArthur Funds and the Alpen Group, and I originally came from private equity and have spent the past 10 years investing, deploying over $200 million worth of capital into the cannabis space. And as our funds now are deploying capital in psychedelics and opportunities, and actually an operational company out of Lugano, Switzerland. I reflect looking at our group here this morning. This reminds me very much of the very early days of cannabis conferences, where you have 100 people in a room, couple hundred people in a room, and then you see Benzinga the last 2 days where thousands of people are diverse. We are in the early stage of looking back in time when you'll see and remember a conference like this and where it's going to. So I'm very excited to be part of this today, and we have a great panel here. So I'm just going to actually go through and ask everyone to make an introduction of themselves, and then we'll kick right into it. Maria?
Thanks, Todd. Sounds great. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Maria Velkova. I'm managing partner of Tabula Rasa Ventures. My background before getting into the psychedelic space, I spent over a decade working in big pharma, everything from R&D to clinical trial designs, regulatory strategy, commercial rollouts of blockbusters. So really getting a perspective of the end-to-end process of what is required to take a drug from the lab to the patient. Our fund is an early stage company acceleration fund. We operate on the front end as an accelerator. So we work with our portfolio companies for 3 months, really allowing us to go deep into diligence with these companies and also to add value beyond just capital. Thank you for having me today, and I'm excited to have this panel.
Thank you.
Andrew Chomer, Managing Partner, Integrated. We are also an early stage venture fund, but we focus on primarily seed and Series A. I would say we're a VC light a little bit. We are very immersed. We're an active investor. We play board member on almost all of the companies that are in our portfolio. I spent the last 15 years as an executive in both digital health, venture-backed companies, and prior to that, I actually started my career in a public company in the advertising and marketing space and built an ad tech company that went on to sell a few times. So excited to be here, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Ahrens, portfolio manager at AdvisorShares. Now, AdvisorShares is an exchange-traded fund company, ETFs. And what that means is, a lot of people are throwing around funds, venture funds, private funds, hedge funds, which are very important in this space for helping companies get off the ground, get funding, get growth. But our fund, we have funds that are available, listed on the New York Stock Exchange for anybody to buy into on almost any platform, such as Fidelity and Schwab and E-Trade and Robinhood and all the others. And AdvisorShares has a track record of creating funds, sometimes where people thought a fund wasn't possible before. We filed for the first actively managed cannabis fund in the world, listed in the United States. The SEC asked us to go out and get legal opinions. We had to negotiate with our custody bank, with the New York Stock Exchange. And we launched another cannabis fund. We have fund MSOS, that happens to be the largest cannabis fund in the world. And shortly after that, we got a good idea to create a psychedelics fund, ticker symbol PSIL, a little short for psilocybin. But the beauty of a fund is it's available for anybody. The holdings are listed on our website every single day. If you go to AdvisorShares.com, they can take a look at that. But then we'll get into what this means and what the status of these companies are, how they compare and contrast to investing in cannabis, what the risks are. But we can go through that later.
Thanks, Dan. David?
I'm David Traylor, Senior Managing Director of Golden Eagle Partners. We're, we're an investment bank. We're the first investment bank to jump into cannabis. I have 15 years biotech operational experience, luckily invented on 3 U.S. patents. And certainly we've been working internationally for 7 years. I'm certainly no expert in psychedelics, but I think 3 points to bring up. First of all, I'm a lacrosse player, started in the early 80s, still play. So obviously if you know lacrosse players, I'm well versed in psychedelics, cannabis, you name it. Recreational side anyway. We've had the first psychedelic client, SciTech, in late 2020. But the other thing that's personal, dear to my heart, I have a daughter who went through a pretty number of traumatic experiences during the pandemic. And I have to tell you, when you are afraid to get a call from your daughter because she's probably going to be crying in a really bad mental state, and you don't want to call from your daughter, it's really a sad place to be. She ended up doing ketamine therapy, and she's on the other side of that, thank God. So the stuff's great. It definitely worked for her.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I go back in time and I think of a cannabis conference that was held about 9 years ago, and MacArthur spoke at that conference, and we met a couple of folks out there sitting in the audience, and we were very fortunate to make an investment in two companies that we ultimately merged. Our fund deployed about $3.5 million into two companies, and within 10 months, we sold those companies for $165 million. At that time, that was one of the largest returns in the cannabis industry.
Wow.
My question for everybody up here is, as we are in those early days, what are some of those opportunities that you see that your funds may potentially deploy capital into, and where are those exciting opportunities?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And on earlier panels, the differences between cannabis and psychedelics were highlighted, so I won't go into that. But it's important to say that psychedelics, one of the main paths to market is going through the medical FDA approval model. With that said, we have made tremendous strides forward in only the past couple of years. The people working in this space have done an incredible job building out the beginnings of this space, but we also must remain sober and realistic with the fact that this is a long-term play. We can't expect drug development companies to, spin out and be extremely successful, roll out it onto the market in just a handful of years. This is drug development, which requires the collection of clinical data, and there is again, as the difference to cannabis, there is a very well-defined path to market. So in terms of our fund, we look at the industry holistically and we invest holistically. So not only drug development, but also in medical infrastructure and also in digital therapeutics and tech. This industry is a nascent industry that's being built from the ground up. So we will require all of those parts to work well and to evolve at the same speed in order to ensure commercial success. And most importantly, access to patients to these medicines. Some of the companies that I'm particularly really proud of having in our portfolio are Enthea, which is the first company to cover healthcare insurance for psychedelic-assisted therapy, currently starting with ketamine-assisted therapy. And it's a really incredible company and a really key company in the space, because one of the biggest hurdles that we're going to face is insurance. How are we going to pay for these medicines? But in recent times, have been speaking to more and more digital therapeutics companies, which are creating different sorts of tools to support physicians in the management, diagnosis of patients, for the preparation and integration of patients around this therapy modality, which is important because C is dependent on that. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll jump in. That's great. So there's a couple things happening right now, right? We have a lot to be encouraged by with what is happening with MAPS, with some of the early results. Small pharma, we haven't talked about it, but the data is phenomenal, really exciting. It's also not trading much more than cash right now. Mm-hmm. So it's a scary time. I think where we're focused as a fund is we look at drug development and we say, okay, we know what will likely be more accessible and commercially viable. And so we're focused on groups that are using rapid acting, shorter duration. Companies like Beckley and Transcend, they're offering something unique. It's not for everybody, right? I know we all have our opinions on what it really needs to look like, and there are multiple versions of that. But I think we also need to look at incremental success, right? For us as a collective to be successful in this world, we have to see companies make it through to the other side, right? And we have to see them be commercially successful. And to Maria's point, we know what it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of money, but it's also going to take patterns that fit. And so that's kind of where what we're excited about and what we're continuing to support. We actually went out and said, hey, listen, we think we're going to launch another fund. And we said, no. It's not the time. Let's actually focus on these companies. Let's make sure that they're successful. Let's work with some of the folks that are out here and make sure that they're funded through this point.
So do you feel that follow-through investing is really the key right now
It's really
versus,
important.
in a sense, spreading out?
Yeah, I think follow through. So think about it. You have a lot of psychedelic funds. So Simeon and Cody and Maria and all of us, right? And they're all on the cap tables of a lot of the companies.
Right.
But they don't make up the amount of money that billion-dollar funds. So what we're trying to do in this early stage is we're trying to move the needle to the next person, right? To get someone that's a billion-dollar fund on the hook so that they can support it. And so we're working in these earlier stages to kind of collectively, which is unlike other, cutthroat VC.
Right.
You don't see that here. It's a beautiful thing.
No, that's an
Yeah.
important point because seeing it in the previous space and now in this space, the funds that work together and do follow on together and so forth,
Totally.
there's a lot more opportunity for
Yeah.
success because no one fund can dominate the marketplace.
That's
There's
right.
just not enough capital for that.
Yeah.
So then I look at Dan, I think about, you're trading obviously and acquiring publicly traded companies within your fund. So in a sense, your research is real different than that earliest stage because they're publicly traded, correct?
Certainly. So, and what you both said is that we're talking about companies that are pre-revenue. They have things in FDA trial. They don't have anything. So when we look at stocks, we're only looking at publicly traded listed stocks. But I still want to say we're talking about microcap, very volatile stocks.
Yeah.
But the thing that's different about cannabis investing, in cannabis, while everybody came from the medical marijuana background, we look at all those things, wonderful things that marijuana can do in pain management and so on. Psychedelics is very, very different because in cannabis, we're looking at their balance sheets, their revenue, getting free cash flow. Even at our stage, publicly traded stocks, we're talking about companies that are pre-revenue. Now, they're looking for companies to help move them along down the road to get more funding until they can get viable. We're looking for companies for our fund that have a certain amount of liquidity, certain amount of tradable, so that our fund can be available to all of you. That's the beauty of a fund like ours. It's a New York Stock Exchange, daily traded, exchange traded fund that happens to invest in, I'm going to name drop here, Compass Pathways, Cybin, MindMed, Celos, GH Research, and Enviric that was just talking up here on your fireside. They're part of the portfolio. So looking at things differently, publicly traded, publicly listed stocks. One last thought that I'll let it go. We filed with the SEC for a psychedelics ETF, and our bank and the New York Stock Exchange and the SEC said, wait a minute, psychedelics, what's going on here? These stocks can be included in your average microcap fund or biotech fund, and no one bats an eyelash. But when you name a fund a psychedelics ETF, they want to throw it in a bucket with cannabis,
Right.
Because it's a DEA Schedule I drug. But no, when we're talking about investing at all of our stages, we're talking about real mental health treatments. We're talking about biotech. We're talking about pharmaceutical. Yeah, we know there's certain states that are decriminalizing.
Right.
That's not investable.
Yeah.
We're talking about real mental health biotech companies, and these stocks, you got to look at them like a biotech. You got to analyze them like a biotech. What's their intellectual property? What's their FDA pipeline?
No, I think that's super well said, and really it's a whole different velocity that will go with the psychedelic stocks and opportunities versus the cannabis. That stigma is a real different stigma that was being dealt with.
Yeah.
So David, I think Golden Eagle obviously is one of the leaders of M&A throughout the industry, and I think you get to look at things from a different approach. I just love to hear a little bit about your kind of almost beginning DD process, because there's got to be plenty of deal flow that you have to turn a lot away.
No, we take everybody. No, well, I think, yeah, we can talk a little bit about that. I think the title of this panel is talking about growth opportunities in psychedelics. As I said, I'm a biotech guy. Everybody else has said really good comments about, the science sector. One thing maybe to think about is I think that the key thing, maybe one of the things in growth is going to be the adoption, right? And the adoption in non-prescription based psychedelics and the adoption for people. So for example, if you don't know Caesar, you ought to talk to him. I talked to him last night from Cultivating Wisdom. He had an aha moment and jumped into the psychedelic after a traumatic situation in the last 6 months. And certainly changed his life. And I think that's one of the key things for the adoption of more psychedelics for, and with all the biopharma aside, a lot of this has to do with individuals taking this on and saying, hey, as they mentioned in the first panel, we had a real problem globally in the US with mental health before the pandemic, and then the pandemic certainly exacerbated that. And as I mentioned with my daughter, and so there are solutions out there, and it takes like my daughter or Caesar people to kind of realize they do have options, explore those options, use those options with psychedelic if that's the option, or breathing or something, seeing results, and then, speaking the gospel. One last other thing, going back to cannabis, I think this is important, is that if there's a killer app out there, so to speak, for psychedelics. For example, if you look at cannabis, I think from being from Colorado, to me, the killer app for cannabis was pediatric epilepsy, right? We had parents moving their whole family to Colorado. And as I mentioned, my daughter is one of the most important daughters in my life. And so people are moving their whole family to Colorado to get access to this treatment that they couldn't in other places, and helped them out. And that changed Colorado's demographic forever. So I don't know what that killer app is, or maybe it's already there that I don't know about, but I think that really groundswell from individual choices is going to be critical to the growth of this industry.
So I'm going to start to throw the questions out really to all of you, and just really jump into where you think you fit right into that. I'd like to have investors, in a sense, kind of, as they look at, let's say, IP and how defensible that IP is. We're around, new compounds, delivery mechanisms. How are the companies prepared, and really the industry prepared, to defend that IP? Because that's a major part of that investment.
Yeah, no, this is a really good question. And we're increasingly seeing more and more companies developing new chemical entities which are patentable and novel. And because there's so many coming online and submitting patents at the same time, it's actually going to be really interesting to see over the next 1 or 2 years how that's going to pan out, because you might come across a situation where someone submitted their IP, a week before, and it's very similar to what another company submitted. So we're yet to see how that plays out, but certainly seeing more and more novel compounds being generated, which, will follow a standard drug development path, which is even longer than what we're seeing with psychedelics, because these compounds have never been in human before. So this is going to be a more standard biopharma play, which means that there is more risk as well. We have an incredible advantage in the psychedelic space with classic psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA, because these have been dosed to hundreds of thousands of people on the ground. So we have that data, and pharma drug development doesn't. So it will be interesting to see how the patents play out once they're granted or not in the next couple of 12 to 16 months, and to see if there's a lot of companies that are looking at similar amounts. And to me, it sounds like there's a ton of companies that are using AI to create novel compounds for the 5-HT2A receptor, and most of them are targeting depression and anxiety. So certainly we're seeing the competition increase, but a lot of the patents are not granted yet. So we're yet to see how that will play out.
I'd answer it a little bit differently. I think, so Beckley right now, if I look at our portfolio, has 2 clinical stage assets with composition of matter IP, right? There's a formula for privately held companies that people are looking at to say, hey, listen, if I have 2 assets and I'm at a certain stage, then I'm primed to go public. I'm a little better prepared, basically. And so one of the things that you look at is you say, okay, so capital is going to play a role. Capital will play a role because now you have a bunch of companies in this market that may not have access to capital,
Right.
whereas some of these others that are a little bit further along can get that capital and start to look at consolidation. So the role that IP plays in that is really one more of a consolidation effort to acquire the necessary IP. And so what we're doing is we're essentially taking really strong researchers and developers and building the system for how you get drug development to go through kind of the process. And then you create the capital to go out and acquire the right IP to help kind of build the overall. And that's why, again, it's not going to be one company that's going to change the world.
Yeah.
We've got to do it as a group and a collective. So
No, I think that's spot on. And then Dan, I'd like almost like a follow-up to that is, as you look at these companies that you're trading, that you're in a sense, putting into your fund earnings, a lot of these are still early
What are
stage.
earnings?
Yeah. So how do you defend price on that and price compression of, early stage within the model?
No, that's a great question. And our fund is what's called an actively managed ETF. Now, actively managed doesn't mean we're trading it every day. Not at all. It's not a tactical strategy. It simply means we're not following an index based on market cap or size or anything. We get to pick. So we think the company's in the best position. Sometimes they're the largest, most liquid, or listed near the top. But as I said earlier, we're talking about treating all these companies as a biotech company.
Mm-hmm.
So what the heck is the valuation? Am I spending my entire day reading their financials and trying to come up with a price? No, I'm depending on a lot of outside analysts. Through my work, I realize which analysts I like to pay attention to and which I kind of tune out, because analysts have a wild history of wild misestimates. But to answer your question, no, almost everything is pre-revenue. It's about intellectual property, their IP, what do they have under their belts, and what is their pipeline of FDA trials. Talking about real mental health treatments, real biotech. I'm going to step back and warn everybody, though. We're still talking about microcap companies. And as you said, there is a great deal of things that have patents, applicants, and it is a wash with patent applications. Some of those companies aren't going to make it. Some of them are. The other thing is, we've come a long way in public perception. Every single day we see real treatments, real uses. I'll name drop again, Daniel Carrillo, traumatic brain injury from his hockey career. Now, through treatment, he's the CEO of a successful psychedelics company. Lamar Odom spoke last year at the conference, real treatment through the use of psilocybin. But we've come a long way with public perception, but we're talking about companies that are far, far away from big pharma still. This company, does this planet have an opioid crisis? Yeah, we sure as heck do. Do we have overprescription to children for antidepressant, so many things, for hyperactivity, so many uses for these drugs, but we have a real push-pull between the microcaps that are doing this industry and big pharma. And I'm not sure how long it's going to take to bridge those gaps.
Thank you.
To continue the thought, so just to make another plug, I've been saying all week, there's a reason why we're a gold sponsor here today and a gold sponsor this week, and Canaccord and our competition are not, for a number of reasons. One of them is, yeah, I do understand IP. As I mentioned, I'm lucky enough to have 3 patents to my name. The last one issued 5 years ago. Marie is absolutely right about composition matter. That's what pharma companies look like and look for, and biotech companies look for. But then also does lead to a long-term development. There's some interesting stuff. Let's get away from, there's composition matter patent, but there's also method of use. So if you guys know Zappy, he's working with a company that's got a really cool method of of delivering psychedelics. It has a completely different, I guess, PK and PD profile. It sounds very, very exciting. And then there's Jeff, who's at Psych Wellness. So they're using A. muscarini. So it's a species of mushroom that is not scheduled, allows them other options. So they're applying it for sleep. So that gets back to my original assertion that if you can find ways to apply for different applications or indications like wellness, makes, I think, everything very interesting. And then also, if you're really talking IP, there's a lot you can do with trade secrets, right? I mean, there's a lot of companies I've known in biotech in this space where, if you do apply for a patent, then yeah, at some point it's going to become public knowledge. And there's a lot of companies that can do things via process, production methods, bioprocessing that maybe you just want to keep secret as a trade secret. And there's very good examples. I think WH Gore was one of those that had a lot of trade secrets as it was a very successful company. So, just because you don't want to go down the path of composition of matter, which is, a very good way to go about it, there's ways to go about it, intellectual property, and having very good IP without not having composition of matter. So,
Thank you. So the marketplace is moving. Obviously there's plenty of opportunity, plenty of deal flow. There's always plenty of deal flow. Quality deal flow may be a different story. So let's just even get into quality deal flow. Yeah. That's there, but capital is king. Without the capital to make the investments, the best companies sometimes don't even get out of the blocks. So I guess my question is, in raising capital to deploy, talk about the environment right now. Anybody?
Yeah, unless you've been living under a rock, it's a pretty tough market right now. But we're starting to see the Fed decreasing interest rates, and the sentiment of the market is that this year they will decrease interest rates, which is driving a lot of the current market. The inevitable truth is that we're likely headed for a recession, although it will be mild because the interest rates are going down, coupled with a mild recession. Liquidity is thought to improve. In terms of the LPs and investors that have invested into the space so far and what we're seeing and how this is evolving, in the beginning, mostly high net worths and individual independent investors were the main funders of this space. Through personal experience and talking to a lot of investors, we're seeing more and more family offices and institutionals getting interested, but definitely not on the level of how biotech is funded, which is endowments and pension funds, and we're a little bit far from that. But also looking at the market, yes, it is a tough market, but it's not only affecting psychedelics. Biotech has been affected in a very similar way. In the biotech ETF is trending almost like 80% similarity to psychedelics, and all early stage asset classes are hit by that. But there are a few more months of some pain, let's say, but there is also a positive outlook. In the latest Fed interest rates were actually below expectations, which is a good sign. Hopefully conditions continue improving. But the most important thing over this year would be to ensure resilience, capital raising for everyone, both for entrepreneurs and raising capital from LPs. It's been tough. So definitely it's not 2021.
No. So I think that almost answers that question. Unless anyone has something really different to say, do you?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's slightly different, but not opposing that view, just more how we're handling this environment.
Okay.
Right. As a fund, so naturally it's not rocket science how funds are funded, right? How you get a management fee, that's how it works. And so we started to go through the process of launching our next fund in this environment and raise the capital, but then consciously said, listen, our companies aren't yet at a performance where we can say, and we've absolutely crushed it. And so instead of launching that fund, we did two things. We said, there's a ton of opportunity right in front of us. We know the devil we know is better than the devil we don't. And so we spend the time with the companies, we immerse ourselves, we sit on the boards, and we're now raising more money for those companies because they're doing well. And we know that the industry needs to have a pattern of success. Second thing we did is we've now generated a lot of interesting deal flow. Things that we haven't talked about are, looking at different supply models like peer-to-peer and group models and all these things that are actually going to be incredibly supportive to what we're talking about here. The other piece of it is we said we do need to keep a tap on early stage companies. And so we launched actually a separate syndicate model so that we could keep a funnel of pre-seed companies and give access to our LPs. And so we wanted to be able to do both, was double down on the companies we have in front of us to ensure that we, show stakeholder value and equity creation, and then, be able to continue that flow, because there are a lot of innovation that's coming down the pipe and we want to be able to support it. So.
Very interesting. So then I have a question in a sense to follow up with both of you, but for everyone, do you see in this environment, as capital is, let's call it, just more difficult to raise, although there's great companies out there, is it too early to talk consolidation within the industry? Are companies starting to consolidate, to merge, to be, I hate to use the word, picked off because great companies with great leaders but no capital? Can we address that?
It's definitely not too early. I mean, Beckley made an acquisition of Elucis last year, and that was kind of the first kind of bigger play. And I would venture to believe that there is another few acquisitions this year, and I know for sure that's going to happen. So it's exciting.
Anyone else on that?
Well, just real quick on the capital side and the M&A. So Golden Eagle Partners, we kind of have a saying in cannabis, and I think it applies to psychedelics. If you're a psychedelic company and you want to raise money, get out of psychedelics. So that's the easiest thing to do. But the main thing is be creative. I mean, don't just look at equity, look at debt, convertible debt. I mean, that's what we do for our clients. We have companies we're working with. Look to talk to companies on doing co-developments, try to get an upfront payment or even some type of option-based deal instead of M&A. Because the other thing is we were the group that did the first, I'm pretty sure the first option-based deal in hemp and also in cannabis. And those are really good deals. We can talk about it later if you guys have questions about it, but those are good deals to do, because if you get in do an M&A deal and you're in cannabis or psychedelics, most of the people that, but most of the companies that work in cannabis and psychedelics are full of shit. And I can't tell you how many times I can count where cannabis companies got together and it didn't turn out, the people were not totally upfront about what was going on. And breaking up a full-on M&A is a hell of a lot harder than breaking up an option-based deal. So look at structural options and for M&A and fundraising. But Dan, you want?
We're almost out of time, but what I want to do is give everyone that last chance for closing comments. We're actually going to start Dan and then go all the way down.
Okay, and I can piggyback on what you're saying a little bit anyway. One thing I might suggest is the beauty of an exchange-traded fund is we're required every single day to list our holdings and update them every single day. So if all of you want to see a list of publicly traded stocks, go to our website. Feel free to invest in our fund, but also feel free to just to spy on our holdings.
I like it.
Now, the other thing is 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I expect our holdings to look dramatically different. And that's because of M&A activity. Now, one thing about investing in these publicly traded stocks is I want to own the acquiree, not necessarily the acquirer. We hope these companies are going to get acquired maybe by big pharma. Their price is going to pop. We also hope companies aren't going to go out of business. But we're looking for the acquirees. We have a big list of funds there that anybody can look at. And the other part is don't invest in stocks because you're expecting them to get acquired. You might wait the rest of your life and then die because it's a fool's game. You can't, they're almost impossible to pick. But we have a whole bunch of stocks. We hope a percentage of them might get acquired.
Closing comment.
Maria?
Maria, you want to go ahead?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, what I said today might have sounded grim and negative, but my intention is certainly not that I'm bearish on this market, and why else would I be here? But I think it's extremely important to remain sober and really look at the challenges and not ignore them. Really look at those challenges, because to overcome them, we really need to understand them instead of ignore them. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, listen, I say be patient. I think be diligent, and there's a lot to be excited about. And so I feel honored to be part of this space, and I feel like collectively we're all doing some really amazing things. So
Thank you. Dave?
One last quick thing. If you guys, this is a tough time, but look back at the history of biotech. I mean, that's one thing that's helped us. This is nothing new. I mean, I've been involved in biotech since the mid-'80s, and it's always been feast or famine. and you just gotta wait long enough. And our advice to companies, just stick it out, be smart about your money, and just live to find another day.
Thank you very much. Let's give the panel a great round of applause. Thank you.
Well done. Okay.
Thank you.
Andrew,
Well
Thank
done.
you.
thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Todd and team. Tremendous conversation right here on the Playbook stage, the main stage.